This word, if you look at verse 9, this is our center point. You know, whenever you're doing Google Maps, you have to pick a place that you map from or to. This is where we're mapping from, okay? And what we're zeroing in on is that word redeemed. It says, and you have redeemed us. Now, that's one word in English, redeem. But God engineered the Bible using the Greek language. And the Greek language has 3 different words that are translated by one English word, redeem. 3 different Greek words for one English word. What's fascinating is every single one of those 3 words speaks of a different facet of redemption. See, redemption is so big that it couldn't be covered with just one idea. And so we see that our redemption is huge to God. So let's unpack what Jesus did on the cross, what's forever going to be our theme in heaven, and see that each word that God chose to express the work of Christ on the cross speaks of his power to redeem us. So, the first word, and it's the word that's right here in verse 9. It's the word agorazo. Now let me explain, give you a picture. I mentioned this last week. If you went to any city in the ancient Roman Empire, the Roman Empire of Julius Caesar and Augustus Caesar that Jesus Christ lived in, every city and town of the Roman Empire that went from, way over by Iraq, all the way up to the lower parts of Russia, all the way over to Great Britain, and all the way into northern Africa, that huge area of the Roman Empire, if you went into any town and said, agora, agora, they would look at you and they'd know by that word agora that you wanted to find the town square, the city square, the forum, or the marketplace. Every city had one. Now, the size depended on what city you're in. The one in Rome is huge. The one in little towns like in Israel today that are being excavated aren't that big. But all of them were the same for one reason. It was the exchange place where you bought and sold things. It was the most strategic spot of the city. And so what happened is a noun that described this agora, which is a noun, began to be so synonymous with the activity that went on there, because the prime activity that went on in this square was the buying and selling of the millions of slaves. The slaves were the long-term employees of individuals. And those long-term employees, they were all treated all different ways. The majority of slaves in the Roman Empire were basically very well taken care of workers, kind of like my dad was. He worked for General Motors for 46 years. He was really totally enslaved to their schedule. He didn't work when he wanted to. He worked when they told him to. He didn't do whatever he wanted. He did what they told him to, and et cetera, et cetera. And if they went into overtime or changeover, he had to cancel everything and did it. I mean, in the truest sense, he was enslaved if he wanted to be paid to that company. Well, in the first century, you bought your skilled workers. And so you always went to the same place to get them, the agora. So soon the noun became a verb form. The word agora, marketplace, became known as agorazo, the place of buying and selling slaves. So the noun became a verb because of the activity that took place in that square. And so Paul and Peter and James and Jesus picked up on this word and took a concept that everybody knew about and gave us the first word. And that first word is bought at the slave market. That word that's in your Bibles in verse 9 of Revelation 5 means to be bought at the slave market. It means that someone went to a place and purchased you there. And that's what redemption means. So to take that concept, that most common word, it just has a depth of meaning that flows into this idea that salvation is not me thinking up, I need help, boy, maybe there's a God, let me go find him. Salvation is God realizing that I am enslaved in sin. And he comes to me where I am and comes into the slave market. And God the Son said, I will buy that one by dying and paying the price to redeem them. What was the price? There's been huge discussion over this. It's the righteous wrath of God that everyone owes him because of their sin. Jesus took the entirety of my wrath owed to God, his righteous wrath against sin. And God treated Jesus like he committed every sin I've ever committed, past, present, and future. That's what your Redeemer is. The one who went and bought you at the slave market. Now, this, and we covered all that last week, I'm just repeating it. Look at 1 Corinthians chapter 6. Because Paul was writing to a group of people in Corinth. And in 1 Corinthians 6, I want you to see in verse 20, what is going on? Because the second time this word occurs, it's in Revelation 5:9, agorazo, to be bought at the slave market. That word occurs a second time in 1 Corinthians chapter 6 and verse 20. And here, Paul says, for you were bought, there's the word, and if you want to circle, if you're doing a little study, there is the word agorazo, to be bought at the slave market. For you were bought at the slave market at a price. And by the way, Peter adds what that price is, 1 Peter 1:18 and 19, he says, it was the precious blood of Christ. You couldn't have a higher, more precious payment than the actual life blood of the person, the purchaser. And so you were bought at a price, which was very high, but look at what this being bought at the slave market means. Look how Paul applies it in verse 20. Therefore what? Therefore, because you were bought at a price, glorify God. You notice what it says? In your body. That means this body of mine, once it's bought by God, is very important. God is looking, our purpose of being redeemed, God is looking that this body glorify him. That's what he bought us for. He didn't buy us just so we can enjoy heaven. He didn't buy us just so we can have a happy, anxiety-free life. He bought us specifically, let me put it theologically, the justifying death of Christ was so that the sanctifying life of Christ would be lived out in my body. Now, do you see why there's a controversy? There are many people who claim they have the justifying death of Christ, but they don't live out the sanctifying life. So, purpose number one, we were bought to be slaves that glorify God. And Revelation 5:9 tells us Christ bought us at the slave market of sin. He bought us with his own blood, and we as believers were bought for a sole purpose, glorifying him.